In the heart of Chicago, nestled along the shimmering edge of Lake Michigan, stands a grand estate that's as much a symbol of power as it is of old money. Within its 12,000 square feet of marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and mahogany-paneled libraries lives Nathaniel Prescott, a man whose name is etched into the city's real estate skyline. At 38, Nathaniel is the heir to Prescott Holdings, a multi-billion-dollar empire built brick by his father, Charles Prescott, during the post-war housing boom of the 1950s and 60s. Nathaniel's life has been one of privilege: elite boarding schools in New England, Ivy League education at Dartmouth, summers aboard 100-foot yachts cruising the Atlantic, and black tie galas at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. To outsiders, he represents the American dream fulfilled: tall, distinguished, always impeccably dressed in tailored suits and polished Oxfords. His photo graces business magazines, and his real estate developments stretch across prime zip codes from Chicago's Gold Coast to Miami's beachfront. But behind the magazine covers and staged smiles, Nathaniel's world is more fragile than it appears. His wife, Evelyn, is a former social worker turned philanthropist, known for her warm demeanor and quiet grace. At 34, she is pregnant with their first child, a moment that should be filled with joy. She spends her days volunteering at St. Jude's Outreach Center and her evenings curled up with books on motherhood. With her gentle Southern accent and nurturing spirit, Evelyn is everything Nathaniel is not: humble, grounded, and deeply committed to making the world a better place. Their marriage, once a tender romance that bloomed away from society's spotlight, is beginning to show cracks. While Evelyn prepares the nursery with hand-sewn quilts and soft yellow paint, Nathaniel finds himself increasingly restless. The weight of legacy, the pressure to surpass his father's achievements, and the isolation of wealth gnaw at him. He attends charity events not to give back, but to escape, seeking solace in places where appearances matter more than substance. Chicago itself plays a silent character in their story, a city of sharp contrasts. Gleaming towers rise above aging brick row houses, and behind every smile at a cocktail party lies a whisper of scandal. The Prescotts live in a world of discretion, but secrets, like water, have a way of finding their cracks. It's in this setting, where affluence masks loneliness, and duty strangles desire, that our story begins. Nathaniel Prescott may have everything, but as any seasoned soul over 55 will tell you, even the finest homes can feel empty when love starts to slip through the cracks. It was a crisp January evening in downtown Chicago, the kind where the wind whips off Lake Michigan and slips through your coat no matter how thick. Inside the Art Institute, the city's elite gathered for the annual Winter Soiree, a black tie affair benefiting children's hospitals and showcasing avant-garde fashion. Nathaniel Prescott was there, more out of obligation than interest. His father's name still carried weight on the donor list, and as the current face of Prescott Holdings, his presence was expected. Evelyn, now well into her second trimester, had chosen to stay home. Her ankles were swollen, and the baby had been kicking up a storm all afternoon. She kissed Nathaniel on the cheek before he left, reminding him to eat something and to call if he'd be late. Nathaniel promised he would. But by 8:45 p.m., his mind was already elsewhere. She entered the ballroom like a slow-burning spark, Isabelle Laurent, a statuesque brunette with a voice like velvet and a reputation that followed her like a designer fragrance. Originally from New York, she had spent a decade modeling in Europe, gracing magazine covers and walking Paris runways. Now in her early 30s, she'd shifted gears into brand consulting and luxury real estate partnerships. It was through this new venture that she was introduced to Nathaniel by a mutual acquaintance. Isabelle's presence was magnetic. She wasn't loud or flashy. Instead, she held herself with a quiet confidence, head high, posture perfect, eyes that studied people more than they spoke. She extended her hand to Nathaniel, her red lacquered nails contrasting the pale skin of her wrist. "Mr. Prescott," she said smoothly. "I've heard so much about you." Nathaniel returned her smile, instantly intrigued. She asked about his developments in Lincoln Park and hinted at knowing influential investors in Europe. Her knowledge of real estate was impressive, but it was the way she leaned in, the subtle touch on his arm, the flicker of interest behind every question, that pulled him in deeper. It was the first time in months Nathaniel felt truly seen, not as a businessman, not as a father-to-be, but as a man with dreams, doubts, and desires. He told himself it was just a business connection, just a conversation. But that night, as the snow dusted the sidewalks of Michigan Avenue and the city hummed under twinkling lights, Nathaniel found himself lingering far too long by Isabel's side. They exchanged numbers under the guise of discussing investment opportunities, but both knew there was more behind the gesture. Back home, Evelyn was already asleep, a book resting on her belly. She had texted Nathaniel hours ago, but his phone remained in his coat pocket, silent, unread. And so, the door creaked open, not wide, but just enough. Enough for temptation to slip through, wearing a black dress, heels clicking against polished floors, and a smile that would soon become a fracture in a once perfect life. As January melted into February, the walls of the Prescott mansion seemed to grow colder, despite the central heating humming steadily through every 10,000 square feet of the Georgian estate. Evelyn Prescott, once glowing with the warmth of early pregnancy, now moved through the house with a heaviness in her step, not just from the growing child inside her, but from the emotional weight settling into her chest. Nathaniel had grown distant. He still kissed her goodbye in the morning, still appeared at family functions, but something had changed. His hugs were rushed, his eyes distracted. Conversations over dinner were filled with silence. His phone, once left carelessly on the kitchen counter, was now constantly in his pocket, buzzing with messages he never read aloud. He began working later, claiming conference calls and networking events, often returning home after midnight with the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his coat. Evelyn tried to dismiss her fears. She blamed hormones. After all, pregnancy had brought its fair share of emotions, mood swings, fatigue, nights of restless sleep. But one afternoon, while folding a basket of baby clothes in the nursery, she noticed a detail she couldn't ignore. Nathaniel's cologne had changed. He used to wear a classic sandalwood blend Evelyn adored. Now it was something muskier, more exotic, and certainly not from their bathroom cabinet. She confided in her sister, Clara, over coffee at a cozy cafe in Lincoln Park. Clara, ever the realist, narrowed her eyes over her cappuccino. "Evie," she said gently, "are you sure he's not seeing someone?" The words hit Evelyn like a cold gust of wind. Her parents had divorced under similar circumstances, her father's infidelity unraveling years of marriage. The idea that history might repeat itself was almost too painful to bear. Still, Evelyn wasn't ready to accuse Nathaniel without proof. Instead, she tried to reconnect. She cooked his favorite dishes, meatloaf with green beans, homemade apple pie. She asked him to join her at a prenatal yoga class, hoping to find laughter in the unfamiliar poses. He always had an excuse: too much work, too tired, meetings running late. Then, one rainy evening, Evelyn made a decision. She baked a batch of Nathaniel's favorite oatmeal cookies and brought them to his downtown office, an unannounced, loving gesture. But what she saw through the glass walls of his corner suite froze her in place. There he was, standing far too close to Isabel Laurent. Their body language spoke volumes, her hand on his arm, his head tilted toward hers, the unmistakable ease of intimacy. Evelyn didn't confront him that night. She turned around, cookies still warm in their tin, and walked into the elevator with tears in her eyes. By the time she reached the parking garage, her heart had broken in ways she couldn't yet put into words. Back home, she locked the bedroom door behind her and sat alone, her hand resting protectively on her belly. For the first time, Evelyn realized she might be preparing to raise this child not as a wife, but as a mother alone. The day after Evelyn saw her husband with Isabel through the glass walls of his office, the Prescott estate felt emptier than ever. The snow outside continued to fall, blanketing the long circular driveway in white, while inside, Evelyn sat at the edge of their king-size bed, her hands resting on her swollen belly, debating whether to say something or say nothing at all. By mid-afternoon, her sister Clara arrived with a sense of urgency in her stride. Evelyn had texted her only one line, "I think I saw it with my own eyes." Clara brought peppermint tea and silent comfort, listening intently as Evelyn recounted the scene at the office, the casual intimacy, the quiet betrayal, the crushing realization. "You can't keep this bottled up, Evie," Clara said firmly. "You need to talk to him. For yourself. For the baby." That evening, Evelyn prepared dinner in the formal dining room, grilled salmon, roasted asparagus, and wild rice with almonds. The table was set with their wedding china, not out of sentiment, but to create an atmosphere of clarity and calm. When Nathaniel walked through the door just past 7 p.m., loosened tie and briefcase in hand, he was caught off guard by the setup. "What's all this?" he asked, stepping inside. "We need to talk," Evelyn said simply, her voice steady. Nathaniel sat down slowly, sensing the change in her tone. As they began to eat in near silence, Evelyn finally spoke the words that had haunted her for days. "I went to your office yesterday," she said quietly. "I saw you. With her." He looked up, startled, then set down his fork. "With Isabel?" Evelyn nodded, her gaze unflinching. "You were close. Too close." "I don't need to hear excuses, Nathaniel. I know what I saw." For a moment, he said nothing. Then came the familiar deflection. "She's a business contact. She's investing in a River North property. That's all." Evelyn's lips tightened. "Do business contacts usually touch your arm like that? Look at you the way she did?" Nathaniel sighed and pushed his plate away. "You're overthinking this. You've been emotional lately, hormones, stress." That broke her. Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes, not from sadness, but from insult. "Don't you dare blame this on pregnancy. I may be tired. I may be emotional. But I'm not blind." Nathaniel stood, pacing toward the window, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't plan it. But it happened," she said. "And now, I need you to leave." The words came out calm, but resolute. Nathaniel froze. "Evie, don't do this. We can fix it. I'm not saying it's over forever. But I can't keep pretending. Not with a child on the way." Within the hour, Nathaniel packed a duffel bag and walked down the wide staircase he once ascended on their wedding day. The staff, sensing the shift, avoided eye contact. Evelyn stood by the front window, watching the taillights of his black SUV disappear down the long drive. That night, for the first time, the master bedroom was hers alone. Nathaniel Prescott checked into the Langham that night, a luxury hotel overlooking the Chicago River, ironically one of the many properties partially owned by the Prescott family. His suite was elegant, plush carpets, floor-to-ceiling windows, and Egyptian cotton linens. But to Nathaniel, it felt more like exile than indulgence. He had never imagined himself walking out of his own home with a duffel bag over his shoulder, not after building a life with Evelyn, not with their child due in just weeks. Yet here he was, sitting alone in a $1,200 a night room, staring at the city he once thought he owned, feeling more powerless than ever. Guilt gnawed at him, persistent and sharp. The image of Evelyn's tearful, composed face haunted him. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't begged. She simply asked him to go. That quiet strength cut deeper than any confrontation ever could. In the following days, Nathaniel tried to keep up the appearance of control. He attended meetings, reviewed blueprints, and fielded calls from investors. But inside, he was unraveling. Isabel reached out, texts, calls, voicemails laced with longing and subtle threats, but he ignored them all. Whatever thrill he had once found in her company now felt hollow, even shameful. Then came the call from his father, Charles Prescott. At 78, Charles no longer ran the company, but his influence was as potent as ever. He summoned Nathaniel to the Prescott Tower boardroom, a space of glass, chrome, and polished oak where billion-dollar decisions were made. "You've embarrassed this family," Charles said without preamble. "Not just with your actions, but with your lack of foresight. You think this won't affect our reputation? Our partnerships?" Nathaniel sat silently, absorbing the reprimand. It wasn't just a father's disappointment, it was a patriarch safeguarding a dynasty. "I don't care if your marriage is in shambles," Charles continued. "But Evelyn is carrying our grandchild. She deserves dignity. Fix this, or at the very least, show her the respect you failed to give." That night, Nathaniel drafted a letter. Not an email. A handwritten note, something personal. He poured his remorse onto the page, not excuses, but acknowledgments. He apologized for the lies, for the distance, for letting ambition and temptation overshadow love and duty. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He only asked for a chance to prove he could do better. Then he called Evelyn. She didn't pick up. So he left a message, "I'm not expecting anything. I just want to support you and our baby. If you're willing, I'd like to attend the next doctor's appointment. I want to be present, truly present." For a man used to controlling outcomes, waiting for Evelyn's response was excruciating. But he knew this time, the power to repair, to rebuild, wasn't his alone. And for the first time in his life, Nathaniel Prescott understood the true cost of everything he stood to lose. It was a quiet Sunday morning in late March when Evelyn Prescott was startled awake by a sharp cramp low in her belly. At first, she assumed it was just another false alarm, Braxton Hicks contractions, her doctor had warned. But within minutes, the pain returned, stronger, sharper, and more frequent. She was still 3 weeks from her due date. Alone in the vast master bedroom, Evelyn clutched her phone with trembling hands and dialed the only number that came to mind. Nathaniel answered on the first ring. "I think it's happening," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "It's too early." "I'm on my way," he said, already grabbing his keys. By the time Nathaniel arrived at the Prescott estate, Evelyn was doubled over in the foyer, suitcase packed, her coat draped around her shoulders by one of the housekeepers. He scooped her gently into his arms, like he had once on their honeymoon, and carried her to the waiting car. The 6.5-mile drive to Northwestern Memorial Hospital felt like forever, every red light a curse, every moment etched with tension. In the delivery suite, fluorescent lights gave way to the hum of monitors and the steady rhythm of Evelyn's heartbeat, alongside the tiny, galloping sound of their babies. Dr. Rachel Monroe, their trusted OBGYN, assured them the baby was coming early, but she was strong. As Evelyn labored, Nathaniel remained by her side. Gone was the sharply tailored executive with a Bluetooth in his ear and a schedule booked down to the minute. Here was a man stripped bare of ego, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement between contractions. "You're doing amazing," he said, his voice cracking. After several grueling hours, at precisely 2:47 p.m., their daughter entered the world with a strong, piercing cry. She weighed 6 pounds, 1 ounce, and measured just over 19 inches. The nurses swaddled her in a soft pink blanket and placed her gently on Evelyn's chest. Tears streamed down Evelyn's face as she looked into the tiny eyes of the life they had created. Nathaniel stood frozen, awe spreading across his features. He reached out, fingers trembling, to touch his daughter's downy cheek. "She's perfect," he whispered. For a moment, everything else fell away, the betrayal, the pain, the silence. In that sterile hospital room, filled with the scent of antiseptic and the warmth of new life, Evelyn and Nathaniel shared something no scandal could ever take from them, the miracle of parenthood. Later that night, as the baby slept soundly in her bassinet, Nathaniel pulled a chair beside Evelyn's bed and sat quietly. She was exhausted, pale, but radiant in a way only mothers are. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" she asked, eyes half closed. "For letting me be here. For letting me witness this," he replied. "I know I don't deserve it, but I want to try." Evelyn didn't respond right away. But her hand reached for his, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't let go. In the weeks following their daughter's birth, the Prescott mansion grew quieter, softer, less like a monument to wealth and more like a home. Baby Abigail, just over 6 pounds at birth, became the center of every room. Her tiny cries echoed through grand hallways once filled with silence. The nursery, painted in soft pastels and adorned with hand-stitched quilts, now glowed with life. Evelyn Prescott, though still recovering, found strength she didn't know she had. Sleepless nights were spent rocking Abigail under the soft hum of a white noise machine. She learned to swaddle, soothe, and read every expression on her newborn's face. Her world had narrowed to the gentle rhythm of feedings, lullabies, and quiet prayers at 3 a.m. Nathaniel, true to his word, didn't disappear. He arrived each morning with fresh groceries, often cooking breakfast before Evelyn woke. He learned how to change diapers, burp Abigail, and cradle her without waking her. And though he stayed in the guest suite, he was present, fully, humbly. Not as a CEO, but as a father. But forgiveness doesn't come on a schedule. Evelyn attended therapy sessions with Dr. Meredith Howell, a seasoned family counselor in her 60s known for her no-nonsense wisdom and soft demeanor. At first, the sessions were tense. Evelyn spoke of betrayal, of nights lying awake wondering if she was ever truly loved. Nathaniel listened, sometimes with his head in his hands, other times wiping away silent tears. Dr. Howell helped them unravel the roots of the affair, not to excuse it, but to understand it. Nathaniel admitted he had felt lost, afraid of fatherhood, and suffocated by the weight of expectations. Evelyn, in turn, acknowledged that she had become so focused on the pregnancy, she had unintentionally left Nathaniel emotionally adrift. Their journey wasn't linear. There were setbacks, miscommunications, moments of doubt, even a night when Evelyn asked him to leave again, just to reclaim her space. But there were also breakthroughs. One afternoon, they sat on the back porch with Abigail asleep between them and laughed, truly laughed, over how completely unprepared they'd been for parenthood. Slowly, trust began to stitch itself back together, not in grand declarations but in small, consistent acts. Nathaniel showed up to every pediatric appointment. He read parenting books Evelyn recommended. He didn't flinch when she cried or snapped. He stayed. And Evelyn, though still guarded, began letting him in again. She invited him to join nightly feedings. She allowed him to repaint the guest room into a family playroom. One morning, he found a sticky note on the refrigerator in Evelyn's handwriting. "You're doing better. Thank you for trying." That note, more than any contract or apology, gave Nathaniel hope. Healing, as they learned, wasn't about forgetting, it was about choosing, again and again, to show up. For themselves. For each other. And most of all, for the tiny life they'd brought into the world. Spring gave way to early summer in Chicago, and with it came longer days, open windows, and the quiet hum of renewal. The Prescott mansion, once filled with emotional tension, now pulsed with the gentle rhythm of a new life. Baby Abigail, nearly 3 months old, was thriving. Her giggles echoed through the halls like music, lifting even the heaviest of hearts. Evelyn still slept alone, but the door to her heart was no longer locked. She and Nathaniel were not back together in the traditional sense. There had been no declarations, no new rings or second honeymoons. But there was a shared understanding, an unspoken decision to move forward in cautious partnership. Some nights they talked until 2 a.m., other nights they simply sat in silence, side by side, as Abigail dozed in her bassinet. For older friends and family, especially those who had weathered their own share of marital storms, this stage of their relationship felt familiar. It wasn't romance. It was resilience. Clara, Evelyn's sister, visited often and noticed the shift. "You're not the same woman who called me in tears," she said one morning over coffee. "You're stronger. Wiser." Evelyn smiled faintly. "I had to be. For her." Nathaniel continued to show up. He canceled out-of-town conferences, opting instead to work remotely from a makeshift office in the sunroom. He prepared bottles, changed diapers at 2 a.m., and read stories from a rocking chair older than both of them. He no longer needed permission to be present, he simply was. And yet, both knew healing was still in process. At times, the past returned in waves, a comment, a hesitation, a lingering look of doubt. Evelyn would catch herself wondering where he was during a late meeting, while Nathaniel sometimes feared he'd never be more than the man who broke her heart. But then Abigail would laugh, or reach for both of their fingers at once, and the heaviness would ease. Dr. Howell, their therapist, reminded them in a final session, not all stories need a perfect ending. Sometimes the best stories are the ones where both people keep choosing each other, even after they've had every reason not to. On a warm evening in June, the Prescotts sat on the back patio, fireflies blinking across the yard. Abigail slept in Evelyn's arms, her tiny chest rising and falling in rhythm with the distant sound of wind rustling through oak trees. Nathaniel glanced at Evelyn. "Do you think we'll make it?" She looked down at their daughter, then back at him. "I don't know. But we've made it here. That's something." He nodded, and they sat in companionable silence, a fragile peace between them. They didn't know what the future would hold. But for now, in the fading golden light of a Chicago summer, a family, bruised, but not broken, found comfort in the simple act of beginning again. And sometimes, that's the most honest kind of ending there is. Life, at its core, is a series of choices, some made with clarity, others clouded by doubt, temptation, or fear. Nathaniel and Evelyn's story is not just about betrayal and reconciliation, it's about the fragility of human relationships and the resilience required to mend them. Their journey offers profound lessons, particularly for those who have weathered the storms of marriage, parenthood, and personal redemption. 1. Trust is hard to build but easy to break. One of the greatest tragedies in life is how quickly trust can be shattered, often in just a single moment. Yet, as Evelyn's story shows, broken trust does not always mean the end. It means the beginning of a difficult but meaningful choice, to rebuild or to walk away. For those who have experienced betrayal, the real lesson is that healing cannot be rushed, nor can it be forced. It must be earned, one action at a time. 2. True love is not about perfection but persistence. Long-term relationships are not defined by grand romantic gestures but by the everyday decisions to show up, even when things are hard. Nathaniel's biggest act of love wasn't words of apology, it was his commitment to staying, to changing, to proving through consistent effort that he was more than his mistakes. In an era where so much is disposable, including relationships, his journey reminds us that love is often about endurance. 3. Parenthood changes everything if we let it. Nothing forces a person to grow faster than the weight of responsibility for another life. Abigail's birth was not just about welcoming a child, it was about redefining priorities. For many who have raised families, there is a deep understanding that children have a way of revealing our deepest strengths and weaknesses. They hold up a mirror, showing us who we truly are and challenging us to become better. 4. Forgiveness is not forgetting, it is choosing peace over resentment. Evelyn's story teaches us that forgiveness does not erase the past, nor does it excuse the pain. Instead, it frees the heart from the burden of anger and allows space for something new to grow. For many who have faced heartbreak, the hardest but most liberating decision is choosing to heal, not for the other person, but for oneself. 5. Life rarely gives us perfect endings, but it does give us second chances. As we grow older, we realize that closure is often a myth. Some wounds never fully disappear, some questions remain unanswered. Yet, as Evelyn and Nathaniel show, the beauty of life is in its ability to offer new beginnings. The choice to move forward, despite uncertainty, is one of the greatest acts of courage we can embrace. For those who have lived long enough to know the weight of regret, the power of love, and the necessity of resilience, this story serves as a gentle reminder: it is never too late to mend what is broken, to rewrite our future, and to choose love, even after it has been tested.